but it's always a pleasure to see Bill, because Bill and I have been going back and forth for quite some times. And Bill was in Leuven a couple of years ago. I was at Hopkins a few years further back, and this back and forth is part of the exchange that we've been having on issues of mimetic and visceral contagion. And I repeated what I said before for Bill. I like to introduce the speakers with a personal anecdote, Bill, because I do think that ideas are the product of encounters, third-like processes of imitation that then generate something new in the encounter. And the question of an intellectual vibration that emerged out of an encounter is certainly the case with Bill Connolly, who along with Jane Bennett also belong to that long chain of supporters and friends that have been part of the Homo Mimeticus journey, even before it set its sails. I was in fact a visiting scholar at the Humanities Center when I was applying for the grant Homo Mimeticus, and I met Bill Connolly in the most promising of places, at Richard Maxey, or as we used to say, echoing some usual French-speaking suspects, chez Maxey. For you should know that Maxey, along with Eugenio Donato and René Girard, was the main organizer of the 1966 Structuralist Controversy Conference, and through parties that used to delight Derrida and many others. In that very same garden, on a summer day, Bill accepted to give me feedback on an article on Conrad and the Anthropocene, and our conversations have continued since. In fact, I soon realized that a genealogical connection with Connolly's work went farther back, as it was rooted in Nietzsche's experimental thought, which gave our exchanges a speed that quickly grew into a friendship that, like a strong affirmative wind, has been accompanying the Homo Mimeticus project since. William Connolly is Krieger Eisenhower Professor in the Political Science Department at Johns Hopkins University, and one of the most influential political theorists writing today. His work focuses on the issues of democratic pluralism, capitalism, inequality, fascism, and bumpy intersections between capitalism and planetary amplifiers in climate change. His books are too numerous to be all listed here, but let me just mention the latest titles, which will make the Nietzschean echoes reaching into the epoch of the Anthropocene loud and clear. A World of Becoming, 2011, The Fragility of Things, Facing the Planetary, Aspirational Fascism, and Climate Machines, Fascist Drives, and Truth, most of them with Duke University Press. Most recently, Bill Connolly has written a fascinating intellectual memoir titled Resounding Events, Adventures of an Academic from the Working Class, just out now with Fordham University Press, which serves as an exemplary dramatization of what it means to be an intellectual who follows deterritorializing problems rather than territorial disciplines, wherever these problems take you. Well, Bill, it seems these problems have taken you back to Homo Mimeticus, and we are delighted to navigate this last stretch of the journey in your company. The title of Bill Connolly's talk is a perfect illustration of the return to mimesis, as it entails imperceptible repetitions with a difference, and reads, Arks at Sea, Arks of Time. Bill, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nidesh. Thank you for the introduction. The paper will not live up to your laudatory comments, but somehow I appreciate the exaggerations anyway. And I have enjoyed working with Nidesh off and on for the last few years on some of these topics. So I will just get right into it. Yahweh looked upon the human, saw him growing monstrous in the land. Desire created only bad thoughts, spreading into his acts. Now Yahweh's pain was hard. I will erase the earthlings I created across the face of the earth, said Yahweh, from human creature to wild beast, crawling creatures to bird in the air. It chills me to have made them. But innocent Noah warmed Yahweh's heart. Am I coming across okay? You can hear me? Okay, good. That's a quote, I guess. The story of innocent Noah and the ark he built amidst abominable corruption is familiar to everyone touched by Jewish, Christian, or Islamic creeds. Similar stories of great floods informed several peoples in Sumeria, Greece, Rome, India, and the Americas. The Gilgamesh story, I am told, is traceable to 2100 BCE and precedes the Hebrew story. In some versions, not the Yahweh version, the gods were angry at humans for being so noisy. I get that. The above formulation is drawn from the Book of J, an attempt in 1990 to translate the earliest version, the J version of Genesis by Harold Bloom and David Rosenberg. Their translation itself became very controversial, though most scholars agreed that there had been indeed a J version. Yahweh, in a fit of righteous anger, decides to punish errant humans and all other earthlings by drowning all of them, except the innocent Noah, his partner, and a crew of gendered couples from several species collected in the ark. Does the inclusion of animals and plants in the Holocaust imply that Yahweh is not only dissatisfied with the errancy of the humans he created, but with his own bungling in the creation of other creatures? For an attribution of responsibility to the latter does not seem to work well. Then, quote, the water overcame everything, overran the land. The ark made its way over a face of water. In much iconography of the event, dead bodies float around the ark. The crimes the humans committed must have been monstrous. For assessed in per capita terms, the story reports the largest Holocaust in the history of the planet to date, this time created by an angry God. The survivors were perhaps burdened with the collective ambivalence that sunk at once into their guts and into both more coarse and more refined brain regions. And finally, into the bumpy mimetic modes of communication between these tiers within selves and through ritual practices. The story stuck. As the tortuous 40 days floating above drowned siblings, parents, and friends drew to a close, after a dove returned with a twig showing that there was now land ahead, the crew started life again, this time more imbued than heretofore with prompts to divine obeisance and existential debt. After all, they had been exempted from the watery Holocaust. Augustine, of course, later transfigures these memorials into a story of original sin, followed later by God's punishment of the sinners in the great flood, and later yet by the birth of Jesus for another beginning. Does that new combination sow seeds, not necessities, but seeds for first, the colonization of Europe by Christianity, and second, the conquest of the Americas by a Christian imperial capitalizing Europe? Some constituencies today take the story of Noah literally. Others treat it as a symbol of the proper relation between God and humanity. Others as a prelude to the birth of Jesus, which repeats it with variations. Others yet as a fiction that it is important to outgrow and replace. A large portion of the latter secularists in making this break, however, also underrate visceral modes of cultural communication. They take two things away rather than one. They ignore how ingrained prompts formed in families, churches, playgrounds, neighborhoods, media experience, armies, and work life are established through rituals and disciplines and folded with variations into public discourses. As one who aspires to deep pluralism, who seeks to have different faiths jostle each other and combine peaceably in the public sphere, I share with secularists a desire to escape the singular province of either Yahweh or the Christian God. But I resist how many secularists downplay the profound role both volatile planetary events and mimesis play in the consolidations and struggles of cultural life. They focus on collective practices of argument, deliberation, and rationality, less alert to how bodily prompts, proclivities, predispositions, and tremors organized on the visceral register of life also inform and infuse culture. So the second part is the Black Sea event. Lo, it now appears that something close to the Noah event occurred about 7,000 years or so ago in clock time, if not necessarily in the way consonant with the story of monstrosity, guilt, redemption, honor, and divine obedience folded into the guts of the Noah crew and refreshed through collective ritual enactments. The recent geological story, as with the older theological one, is also contested. It too has more than one variant. One version reports rapid flooding into the basin now forming the Black Sea. Another contends that the flooding was less rapid, but still very extensive. The first identifies circumstantial evidence that many terrorized by the rapid flood into the Black Sea basin fled to Europe and others south to Mesopotamia. Indeed, the theological story had until recently been challenged by a vintage geological myth of planetary gradualism, confessed by most geologists for over 2 centuries. The latter scientific myth had discouraged geological investigations of ancient floods in the Black Sea, India, and the Grand Canyon. Geologists who professed periodic catastrophism, the periodic interruption of slower and geo and species changes by radical shifts of numerous sorts, were defined to be heretics. Here is the new geo story. Until 7,000 or so years ago, what is now the Straits of Bosporus linking the Mediterranean to the Black Sea was blocked. A large freshwater lake occupied a chunk of the basin, where the much larger Black Sea now resides. Farmers and merchants living on fertile land around the lake, land refreshed by seasonal floods fed by rivers flowing into it. But then, as the Mediterranean rose rapidly, the Bosporus block shattered and vast amounts of water flooded into the basin over a short period. The Black Sea was formed quickly. Residents who had clustered around the smaller old lake were thrown into turmoil, forced to flee with only some of their cattle and implements. Some headed south. There must have been incredible grief and gnashing of teeth after that event. A calamity turned retrospectively into a story of desert and infinite human debt to divinity, burned into the guts of survivors for the faithful to recite on ritual occasions. What would it be like to acknowledge close relations between non-human event and mimesis while striving to cultivate modes of visceral communication that drain a pervasive sense of existential indebtedness and guilt from them? What image of time might emerge from such explorations? I will leave the first, rather intractable question a bit in abeyance today, while pursuing more closely the relations between event, memory, and mimesis, except to suggest that a new catastrophism appropriate to today needs to be matched by concerted individual and constituency strategies to fold respect for the rocky grandeur of the earth and the fragility of entangled species life more vibrantly into the collective sensorium. Not an easy task. To be clear, evidence in favor of rapid formation of the Black Sea through surges from the Mediterranean is impressive. It remains very less certain, however, whether that event provided the base for the Noah fabulation. But let's persist as if it may have happened that way. Mimesis and the uncanny. This is part 3. The uncanny involves a response by adults to a new event that both rattles them in its break from the past and darkly taps childhood events that resonate unconsciously with it. The uncanny thus moves at once on two modes of depth and two temporal registers of experience, connecting them through resonance, unfamiliar but strangely familiar. The story of Noah taps collective unconscious childhood memories, say, of being punished for a crime you did not know you committed until after the punishment. Without mimesis, there would be neither a culturally rich emotional life nor the uncanny. Without the layering of memory and modes of communication absorbed from bodily caresses, sharp intonations, facial expressions, and the like, there would not be either. Memories would feel more like snapshots. Event, layered memories, affective consolidations. By stratified cultural memories, I mean those that both include and exceed recollections. Did your mother stand up to that racist when you were a child? The family will debate that. Memory as recollection, both within individuals and constituencies. Below recollection, however, both efficacious themselves and feeding into recollection are two additional layers of constituency memory. The second stratum of constituency memory takes the shape of shared dispositions. That is, shared purposive drives, prompts, insistences, and premonitions digested through previous tokens of experience, communication, and discipline. They operate below or on the edge of the register of recollection. A selection of such purposive drives organized from the past is pulled up in the face of a new event in ways that help to bind a constituency together on a sheet of time. A drive or a disposition on this reading is thus a consolidated purposive tendency to response to new experience that faces in at least 3 directions: toward the event that activates it, toward other drives activated from the past by the event, and toward a constituency that has gone through similar bouts of induction, appreciation, punishment, and ritual performance. Different constituencies may respond in radically different ways then to the same event, as those clustered around Noah on the one hand and around Ovid did, who had another story of the Great Flood. Or as white evangelicals and the professoriate do in the States today in the face of wildfires, extreme storms, and glacier melts. A specific cultural cohort is thus not entirely reducible to a set of class, gender, race, and creedal positions. The cohort is also drawn together by distinctive visceral dispositions, synthesized in the past and called up by events. Spiritual constituencies haunt, inflect, and stretch beyond those of those unities of class, creed, race, gender, and sexuality, beloved by sociologists. Take the cohort drawn to Donald Trump or to Marine Le Pen. So recollections and constituency drives inorganized from past expressions form the first two strata of collective memory. This third layer, the third layer for individuals and constituencies, comprises remains, loose ends, scars, or memory traces that are too incomplete to be recollected or to form definite drives. They can nonetheless be activated by a new event in ways that may resonate with the event and other layers of memory. It would indeed be surprising, knowing what we do about entangled cultural body-brain processes, if we were not all loaded with affect-imbued remainders that, when resonating with new events, exude strange efficacies of their own. Maybe in the midst of the Anthropocene, you have finally outgrown old beliefs on the refined register of articulation about human exceptionalism, sociocentrism, and planetary gradualism. Hopefully, you have. Nonetheless, vague remainders or tremors from old beliefs drummed into us as children continue to rumble around on lower frequency registers of being. Maybe a gifted orator taps some of those remains after a new event rattles life, helping to pull them in a new direction. Or a gifted writer does so in another direction, as Nietzsche sought to do when he sounded out the old European idols of God, linear time, and reason in Twilight of the Idols, striving to pull those pulses and remains in new directions because he thought they were dangerous. We're to their vague premonitions in J, the author, that imbued a certain wariness of Yahweh into her prose, casting subliminal doubts upon his most grandiose actions, judgments, punishments, and pronouncements. Harold Bloom and David Rosenberg thought so. The very sparseness and distancing mechanisms of the J prose suggested that to them, making their translation all the more controversial. Part 5 is called Events and Time. What then is an event? As a first cut, an event is an unexpected happening that interrupts either a previous temporal trajectory or an extrapolation into the future that had informed a constituency's conduct before its arrival, or both. An event thus rattles at once the visceral register of expectation, more explicit expectations, loose pluripotentialities on the way, and often all three at once. Doing so, it sets up the constituency in question either to forge new turns in its old creed or to hold onto it via more arduous work upon the visceral register of culture. Delays in the second coming formed the sort of event I have in mind. So did the rapid Bosporus flooding of the Black Sea. So too has that double viral crossing from a bat to a pangolin and then a pangolin to humans that spawned COVID-19. And so too has the rise of the Anthropocene, as it increasingly rattles debates between those who believe capitalism promotes indefinite progress to master the earth, those who pursue a future model of capitalist or socialist mastery, and those who contest those visions with a more organic image of the human relation to the earth. A disruption of all three contending visions, perhaps helping to explain why so many residing in temperate zone capitalist states today remain frozen in place as the world melts down. Some events fall within the parameters of sociocentrism, the quaint Eurocentric modern idea that the basic sources of social change are always internal to social structures themselves. Many events, though, actually burst into the world from outside that cocoon, as did the Great Flood of the Bosphorus, the medieval warming period, and the 220 pandemic. Such events, one might be tempted to say, ignite bends, bumps, or turns of time itself, not in time, but of time. And to rethink these issues, we have to rethink the prepositions we unconsciously select. Of time itself, suggesting again how the idea that time must either be cyclical or linear, progressive, provides woefully inadequate guides to experience. For time itself may be composed of multiple temporalities moving on different vectors, speeds, and capacities, teaching us how events often find us before we find them. In a world of multifarious accelerating events set on different temporalities, neither the major nor minor image of time in Western thought may suffice. Time itself, it might be said, is composed of diverse temporalities at key junctures, bumping and sliding into one another, zones of time. The rapid closing of the ocean conveyor system 12,700 years ago was an event that altered the trajectory of climate into the future for populations in Europe and the Americas. So too was the stuttering into being of the Holocene over perhaps a mere 10-year period in clock time. And the rapid emergence of the medieval warming period with its different consequences for Europe, the Mongols, the Inuit, and the Mayan Empire also altered several zones of time. Okay, events do occur, you may well say. Experience may even be jolted and turned by them. But Connolly, time itself rose on unperturbed by such turns, like Old Man River, who just keeps rolling along. I know that song, I even sing it sometimes. Time, you might say, sets a single homogeneous container in which diverse experiences occur. We will turn to that issue in a moment, Einstein. In the meantime, don't forget that the Mississippi River, among which the song was composed, is itself a historical formation. Typically, an event involves the crossing of two or more diverse temporalities moving at different speeds on different vectors, as when the trajectory of that asteroid 66 million years ago intersected with the evolutionary trajectory of dinosaurs. They had survived for 130 million years before that event. So it made perfect sense for the linear statisticians among them to extrapolate millions of years more into their calendar. Or when an intense El Nino on one trajectory intersected with trade winds on another to fashion the monsoon interruption that devastated the African Horn, India, and parts of China at the end of the 19th century. That may well happen again, though not in exactly the same way. The very diversity and frequency of events may suggest that time itself is not composed of any single dimension, even though Descartes, Newton, and Einstein have all taught otherwise in different ways. It may be timely to question, for instance, whether time is anchored only in the stable, rapid speed of light rays hurtling in separable instants to the Earth, bending on the way as they encounter planetary bodies with different gravitational pulls. Even that conception seems to involve the encounter of two temporalities, light rays and gravitational pulls. Time itself may twist or bend, accelerate and stall. Time, too, may be a multiplicity, as Michel Serres proposes. The very idea may be disturbing to many. Albert Einstein's old chestnut that he had captured objective time through a precise binary logic and impersonal observation, while Henri Bergson himself, also a very accomplished mathematician, floundered around in fuzzy logic and subjective human experience of time, may not turn the trick anymore. Einstein and Bergson, in fact, invested subjective authority in different logics and in different features of human subjectivity. A mathematization of experience by the first figure and differential experiences of duration by the second. Neither the physicist nor the philosopher, however, was yet prepared to delineate closely what might be called the evental register of time, even though Bergson set one pretext for later attempts in clock time to do so by exploring multiple modes of duration, extending through and beyond human cultures. Such a plurality of temporalities would soon come to include viral temporalities, bacterial temporalities, whale temporalities, and extinction temporalities, with each periodically bouncing or sliding into others, let alone glacier, climate, ocean conveyor, monsoon, volcano, and migration temporalities. Another way to make this point, perhaps, is to say that time is composed neither by a single type of experience, the human experience of duration, nor a single measure, say the speed of light. It is composed of multiple measures and trajectories moving at different speeds on different vectors, temporalities that intermittently intersect. Time, multiplicity, and event now become married together. Time becomes a thing of this world, just as logic, event, subjectivity, and truth have done for many in recent years. Rocky Seas, Bumpy Time, and Mimesis. Nidesh Lawtoo is attuned to how mimesis works on multiple registers of culture. Attending to neuroscience research on mirror neurons, I started to wonder yesterday whether Professor Galiz would accept the term now absorbent neurons rather than mirror neurons, but I didn't press my button fast enough. Attending to mirror neuron research, Lawtoo explores how the choreographed rhythms, countenances, tonalities, and gaits of leaders become injected into the sensorium of followers, and how when bodily props previously installed within us find potential modes of ingression to be repugnant, a series of embodied resistances and exclusions are intensified even before the more reflective registers of discourse and culture are engaged, as some will do in the face of the idea of time as a multiplicity. If you add coarse brain regions, such as the amygdala, and gut brain relays to Lawtoo's attention to mirror or absorbent neurons, and add to that list skin and olfactory sensors, you can identify a whole battery of low frequency modes of ingression that help to compose cultural drives, prompts, and precursors below the attention of refined reflection and collective discourse. These deposits may contain some innate elements, but to a considerable degree, they embody ingression synthesized into shared constituency deposits from different pasts. These cloudy and coarse deposits, once received and synthesized unconsciously, percolate or sometimes rush into more complex registers of deliberation and discourse. inflecting them. So they perform double duty, influencing conduct on their own, in flowing into refined registers to encounter responses from them. Keeping in mind that the lower frequency register of constituency life memorializes coarse versions of past aggressions in ways not easily susceptible to routines of reflexive recall and reworking, limiting the magic of the dialectic of self-consciousness, we can now see how work in neuroscience and cultural theories of mimesis can help to sustain and inform one another. Together, they may teach more about how unconscious aggressions become synthesized below consciousness, how experiences of the uncanny work, how old traumas become reenacted, how denialisms of various sorts become encoded, and how fascist movements acquire initial purchase below the attention of elites focused only on refined discourses, deliberation, debates, and cultural arguments, or even the separation of powers. Never forget the latter, refined discourses, but don't focus exclusively on them either. In Conrad's shadow catastrophe mimesis theory, Lawtoo turns to Joseph Conrad, the sometimes racist author with experience as a sailor on the high seas. Doing so to explore how fast, intense mimetic circuits amid an emergency at sea bounce from non-human forces to the crew and into relations between crew and captain. Conrad addresses together the sea, the planetary, and subterranean affective currents. A storm, a rocky sea, a tsunami, a rogue wave, a viral infection, a prolonged lull at just the wrong moment, a shortage of water, a splintered mast, a hurricane. Such planetary non-human events sometimes sustain and sometimes disrupt delicately organized balances of life on board a small ark tossing around on an open sea. A panic may erupt just when close collaboration between captain and crew is urgently needed, and indeed when the inner balance of the captain is most needed. Here are a few things Lawtoo and Conrad say. These are quotes. 1, time and again, we have seen that a non-human menacing shadow lurks in the background of Conrad's fictions of the Homo duplex. 2, a mimetic approach requires a specific foreground to environmental forces first in order to subsequently trace the complex interplay of human and non-human forces. 3, it also opens up channels for contagious infections that can potentially penetrate, contaminate, and eventually undermine the power structure on which the body politic of the ship rests. And the last, panic is a mimetic reaction par excellence, insofar as it spreads contagiously from subject to subject, overtaking like a wave the entire social body and generating a type of horror that introduces sameness where difference should be preserved. During his engagement with Conrad on life at sea, Lawtoo invokes the notions of multiplex selves and multiplicitous social order. A captain might recall an earlier incident at one moment and enact a purposive instinct absorbed from the past at another moment. Something like a point guard does during a fast break when allowing unconscious instincts formed through long practice to take over. Why? Consciousness is too slow at those moments, and consciousness emits tells. The self itself is a complex social structure with multiple voices operating on different registers of refinement and affective energy. So say Nietzsche, Conrad, Proust, and Lawtoo. Pulses of different strength and tendency jostle around during a crisis at sea. Those old debates between the singular individual and the collective order may now seem rather stale. So too may those between innate instinct and detached reason, and maybe those between linear and organic time. Does life at sea throw them all overboard? Michel Serres is one figure who would think so. Emergency, the possibility of catastrophe, the very type of event for which the multiplicitous order of the ship has been forged, also shows how fragile the complex can become, how it is susceptible to potential breakdown. One guy goes berserk in a Conrad scene. Other crew members become unhinged. A contagion races through the ship. Or perhaps the captain himself, a denialist incapable of acknowledging how fragile things are, goes berserk under pressure, as Ahab did in another novel. Certainly, things may hold together, but the probability of that happening may improve if you have already acknowledged the fragility of a world in which effective contagion does not merely flow through crews, but also bounces from planetary events into and across territorial regimes. Mimesis. The fragility at the heart of a city-state as exposed by Sophocles. The shock of a great flood as shown by Noah and Ovid. The precarity of a ship at sea as shown by Conrad and Lawtoo. And the planetary imperial crunch faced by racialized post-colonial non-temperate regions today have now migrated toward imperial states in temporal zones. We too are cast upon open seas, rocking along in fragile arcs during a volatile planetary period that invades and jolts diverse geo-capitalized regions in diverse ways. Entire ways of life are at stake. The ensemble of constituency denials, positive activisms, casualisms, and aspirational fascisms infecting the first world, the contending bodily prompts to active rework and panic in play today, carry tragic potentialities for regions in non-temperate zones and increasingly for regions in temperate zones. We bounce around in open seas and arcs of different sizes, pursuing more positive activisms and facing the new risks of fascism piled onto pressures of the Anthropocene, bobbing around within the entrenchments of capitalism, empire, secularism, and old theologies. Do visceral objections to the very bumpiness of time play a role in the denialisms and casualisms marking the modern era? This is not pessimism. It's a series of warnings about that need to be accompanied by a series of activisms.